What's up, biology students? How are you? Hope you're doing well. This week, our video lesson is about evolution. Evolution, and the evidence that we have to prove it. This is one of my favorite concepts of biology, so I hope you like this video. Today, we're focusing on what is evolution and what evidence do we have to support the theory. First things first, what is evolution? Evolution is a scientific theory. The theory states that all living things on Earth, every single organism, shares a common ancestor, and that species change and diversify over time and continue to evolve. A common ancestor, what that means is that if we were to create a family tree of every single person and living thing on Earth, it can be traced back to a single species that each and every one of us comes from. The common ancestor that we are believed to share is a type of protist. It's a very simple organism. There is a lot of evidence to support this theory. Before we get too deep into the evidence, I want to talk about theories. What is a theory? We throw this word around all the time in the science world. So let me break it down for you. A theory is basically an explanation. It's an idea of how or why something works. Theories are tested repeatedly, not just by one person, but by others as well. Anything is possible, right? It's a theory that if I pick up an object, if I let go of this object, it will fall. That's called gravity. That's a theory. Theories are something we're pretty sure about, 99.9% sure, but there's really just no way to fully 100% confidently say this. A theory starts with an idea or a thought, an observation. Once you test the idea, you can come to a conclusion, and then share those ideas. Let other people test the same thing. If the test is repeated over and over and the same answer is found, that's how you build a theory. Sharing and publishing your findings, discussing them with your colleagues and getting feedback so that they can also test and build on what you found. Come up with new ideas and new questions and continue to build that theory. So for evolution, people have been researching evolution for a very long time. The evidence that we have can be categorized as fossil evidence, anatomical evidence, biogeographical, embryonic, and molecular evidence. I will break down each one of these words within this video, but let's start out with fossil evidence. What is a fossil? I'm sure you guys have heard this word before. Fossils are the remains of living organisms that have actually been preserved in rock. To be preserved in rock, that means that some part of its body, whether it's the bones or the shape of its body imprinted in the rock, has been saved over millions and millions of years. Archaeologists go in and dig up these fossils, and they can tell us a lot about history and what was happening on Earth during the time that species was alive. There's even fossils of bugs that were preserved in the amber or the sap of trees. A perfect replica of a bug. Not a replica, an actual bug. Crazy. So how does this work? What do fossils show us about Earth? We have been able to gather from our fossil evidence that the Earth was made approximately 4.5 billion years ago. There are so many zeros on that number, they don't even bother to write them. So the Earth was made 4.5 billion years ago. 500 million years later, first life developed on Earth. I'm not talking about humans and monkeys and giraffes. We're talking about like very simple organisms, like tiny little algae, bacterias in the ocean. It wasn't until 2.7 billion years ago that the first eukaryotes showed themselves. Remember, eukaryotes are the more complex form of cellular organisms. So that's when life got a little bit more complex. Eukaryotes have an enclosed nucleus, multiple organelles to help them function. They can also be multicellular. Up until this point, life on Earth existed in single cellular organisms. That means every living thing was just a single cell. We're talking tiny, okay? So we had eukaryotes, but it wasn't until 600 million that the first multicellular organisms came to be. Crazy stuff. We know this because of the fossil evidence that we have discovered by digging up the layers of the Earth. So cool. Let's keep going. So far, we know that there are multicellular organisms on Earth, right? But those organisms haven't even reached land yet. All of life started out in the ocean. But then, about 400 million years ago, those organisms started to creep their way up on land, and we had our first land animals. But these probably weren't the land animals that you're thinking of. I'm not talking about giraffes and cows and chipmunks. I'm not even talking dinosaurs yet. First land animals were actually more kind of bug-like. They really compare a lot to the aliens that you see in movies. So that's about here. As time goes on, species start to get larger, more complex, and about 230 million years ago is when we have our first dinosaurs. Quite a bit of evolution before the dinosaurs made their debut. So right now, we are here, the Jurassic period. This is when the first dinosaurs start to make their way onto Earth. About 75 million years ago, all non-avian, avian means bird-like, so non-bird-like, dinosaurs that were not looking like birds went extinct. You'll see we have an extinction here and an extinction here. We know this because of our fossil evidence. We can see that there's a long period of time where these certain organisms stopped existing. We know this based on where underneath the Earth's crust their bones and their fossils are found. Then, about 200,000 years ago, which in comparison isn't that long at all, we have the first humans. So just think about that. If this is our time scale, this image is drawn to scale, which it just is mind-blowing how little time human beings have been on Earth in comparison to how long Earth has been around. Let's go back to this slide. 4.5 billion years ago, the Earth was created. And human beings have only been here for 200,000. A tiny blip in Earth's history. Okay, we have a little thing called transitional fossils. Transitional fossils show us how one type of organism evolves into another type. An example of this is called the Archaeopteryx. Silent P. The Archaeopteryx has bird and dinosaur traits, which is evidence that dinosaurs actually evolved into birds. In this picture, we have the evolution of the horse. Equus means horse. So you can see the way the head has changed, the foot shape has changed, and how many toes horses have. And this evolution happens over millions of years. The traits that make an organism more suitable for its climate and habitat will be carried on to the next generation as that animal survives. Here's a picture of the Archaeopteryx. Flashing lights. There's a question about this organism on assignment option 1. So come on back to this slide for help on that. Okay, moving on to our next piece of evidence. Anatomical evidence. First of all, the word anatomical body parts. So if you take an anatomy class with Mr. G, you will be learning about the different parts and systems of the human body. So there's evidence based on anatomy of current living organisms that can be used as evidence for evolution. There are body structures that are so similar that they must have evolved from a common ancestor. An example of this is our hands. Here we have a human hand, right? 5 fingers, 2 bones in the forearm at an elbow. If you were to take an x-ray of a dog arm, you would see very similar structure. They have 5 finger-like bones and then 2 bones connecting to that. If we look at a bird's wing, there are bones that have the same exact structure. 2 forearm-like bones, carpals in the wrist, and then some finger-like projections. And then we have the whale. Whale fins also show these structures. Similar parts between species, even if they're used for different things, like flying versus climbing, these are called homologous structures. Remember, homo meaning same. Here's some more anatomical evidence. There are certain organisms that have body parts that they do not use. Unnecessary body parts. This is because those body parts used to be really important to a certain ancestor of that organism. So although they don't use it, it's still part of their body. It's part of their anatomy. An example of this is in whales. Whales are a mammal like human lions and dogs, but whales don't have legs, so why would a whale need hips? All whales have structure in their body that closely resemble hips. Now these hip bones don't add anything to their survival rate. It doesn't make it harder for them to survive. Those bones are just there. And there's a name for this type of body part, and that's vestigial. Vestigial structures are structures that are not used anymore, but still are part of the body. Now let's move into the biogeographical evidence. I am going to quickly break this word down. Bio, life, geo, earth. So we're studying the biology, or how organisms live in relation to or compared to their geographical location, and thinking about why that relationship exists. So, a good friend of mine named Charles Darwin, who is known as the father of the theory of evolution, did a lot of studies on finches. Finches are a type of bird, and he looked at the geographical distribution, so where different species of finch are located and why. He looked at their beak shape and what they like to eat. So this finch has a perfect beak for eating buds and fruit, whereas this finch has the perfect beak for eating grubs. Grubs are little nasty, they're gross bugs in the ground. But based on the location of these finches, their different traits make it easier for them to survive in their location. But it can be hypothesized that these finches come from a similar ancestor finch with traits that they all share. Ratites live in the red areas shown here. This is where they live currently. The ostrich in South America, the rhea in Southern Africa, and the emu in Australia and parts of South Asia. The location of these birds is significant because it supports the theory of continental drift, which states that at one point in time, way many years back, instead of having many continents spread across the globe, all land masses were located very close together and were even one single landmass called Pangea. Some of you may have heard of this. Based on the location of these three birds, which all have very similar traits, we can gather that at some point, many years ago, there was a single species of ratite, and as the continents drifted apart, they evolved differently depending on what was most suitable for their location, which was different than when it was a single landmass. And then we have embryology. What word do you see in this long embryology word? I'll tell you what word I see. I see embryo. So ology means the study of. Embryo means little tiny pre-babies, not babies yet. So the study of embryos. By looking at embryos of different species, we can see many similarities, okay? These are the embryos of different species. Notice how they are all very similar. They're nearly identical. So this phase of the embryo is before differentiation. That's this word right here. Differentiation is when our cells, when we are developing as little baby embryos, more specific jobs to do. These embryos actually mimic evolution. It's like a microcosm of evolution. Human embryos, so when we are little tiny embryos, we have gills and a tail. Gills are what fish use to breathe. So humans are like little tiny baby fish. And the same goes with pigs and chickens. And this is more proof that at some point, billions of years ago, we maybe all looked like this. Now we're zooming in to our cells. Molecular evidence. So, by zooming in and looking at the genes or the specific DNA sequences and codes that we see in multiple species, we can gather data on just how similar organisms are, based on how similar those codes are. For example, human beings share 98.8% of our genes with chimpanzees. That means 98.8% of our genes is exactly the same as chimps. Chimpanzees are our closest relative in terms of other species, which is wild. If that doesn't prove evolution, I don't know what does. Here are some other species comparisons. Human being compared to a chimp, compared to a gorilla, we have 89.7% similarity. 84 for orangutans. And then as we go down the list, it becomes less and less similar. But still, to these Barbary macaques, another species of monkey, we have 74.5% exactly the same genetics. It's wild. I mean, this stuff really just blows my mind. I think it's so cool, and it's just so fun to learn about. Hopefully I didn't leave anything out, and all of this makes sense to you guys. Let me know if you have any questions. Tell me what part you thought was the coolest of this video. Don't forget to do the virtual lab or online interactivities to help you learn about this. I encourage you to reach out not just to me, but to each other. Say, hey, we're all experiencing this social distancing thing and handling it in our own way, but it's never a bad idea to give somebody some support. So reach out to each other. Say, hey. All right. I hope you enjoy this